We enjoy hearing from our people who've been in our presentations many times over time, and especially as you apply the masters, the key negotiation strategies and tactics that we're going to be discussing today. We love your feedback. We love hearing how you win big deals because you planned it out very well. I just finished consulting with one of our CEOs this morning on how to restructure a deal with a high-priced consultant, and a lot of smiles when we finished because people learned it. So today we're going to teach you how to get what you want, how to master the key negotiation strategies and tactics. And with that, let us begin and focus on how to do it. I'll always try to give everybody an understanding of what we're going to be discussing. We'll define negotiations and what are the elements of it. As you know, I'm a teacher. I teach at CUNY and in China, and actually did a presentation one day to lots of different classes on negotiation. It was the hit, I'm told, of the summer last summer, so maybe we'll do it again this summer when I'm back there. But we'll talk about what it takes to be a great negotiator. We're going to focus on strategies, because that's really what it's about. And then within those strategies, what are some of the tactics or gambits that you can use? For those of you who have done some self-reading or attended programs, many people who are experts in the area focus on tactics and gambits. Our feeling is that's the cherry on top. You really want to focus on the basics, the strategies first. We're going to focus on some principles to increase your effectiveness as a negotiator, and then focus on what it really takes to win. And I'll give you a hint. It's about deliberate practice. Practice is very important. I teach this at the MBA level. I focus on exercises which force my students to really practice it. And it's a big difference between that and listening. So let's define terms. What is negotiation? It's a communications process by which you're trying to achieve an action or an agreement with someone else. So it's not something about influence per se. For those of you who are into the Robert Cialdini, and we'll talk about it later, work on influence. Negotiation's got a very specific action in mind. You want to reach a result, and you know what that is right away. Therefore, you're trying to ask the question, am I trying to sell or buy an idea, an object, product, or service? That's what you really have to focus in on. What is it you want? If you don't know what you want, that's why we start there. You're not going to probably get what you're looking for. So to understand what it is you really want up front, and then figure out how do you sell or buy it, and what are the things you need to trade, the values to make the exchange. So again, it's a kind of a funnel that you're working through, setting the stage for selling and buying of what it is you're looking for, and then making a trade-off, an exchange of different values that people have. What's important to understand that you don't have to go in with the win-win proposition that Harvard's negotiation team suggests, but we agree with them. It's a very good approach because what it does is it focuses both parties on being collaborative. All the energy is focusing on trying to find a way to make it work. And as we'll discuss, our philosophy in doing negotiation is to go beyond just what's on the table, but going outside the table. And that works much more effectively when what you're looking for is a solution that everybody can use. If you're focusing on how do I beat the other party or how do I react to them constantly, you're within the box, so to speak, for those of you who attended our Creativity Innovation Program, as opposed to outside of it. And the key very often in winning a negotiation is by expanding the table. And if you've done that, you've built the trust and the respect of the other parties, which actually makes it easier to move to the next level of doing presentations. So let's define again those terms: selling, buying, and exchange. What is selling and buying? For those of you who are in sales, you might be interested in knowing all the current data showing that in the past, people needed to sell material because they were the information providers. And as a result, they played a very critical role in getting someone to buy. Today, with the internet being what it is, an information source, as well as a place you can buy and sell, obviously, for e-commerce, but as an information source, 57% of all buying and selling is taking place before they actually go to the store, talk to the salesman, etc. People are doing their homework. Half of the information is already there, 57%. That number is probably going up every year. So it's something to keep in mind. in that process, what you're trying to do, and once that person says, I know some information, but why should I do it? You're in the process of helping persuade them. You're influencing them, to use Robert Cialdini's phrase. And there are three parts to that. One is logic, one is emotion, and one is power. And depending on the relationship you have, it's going to be a different thing. Most of us like to think we buy based on logic. We're rational buyers. The reality of the situation is we're not. We tend to be, I'm a psychologist, as you know, we tend to buy based on emotion. Okay, what I really want, I'm going to do it, and that's why there are many experiments which have shown people will actually pay more than $1 in an experiment for the dollar because it's an emotional and you get carried away with it. Logic very often becomes the rationalization for what we do. And so we need to understand it. So maybe we buy something based on what we're looking for, what we want, we like it, and then we rationalize it's of good value. But there are times where the real dimension is power. Okay, if one source has more power than the other, it will make a difference. When Donald Trump sits at the table with you, he has a lot of power. That's why he can hire and fire as he has on The Apprentice. He controls the power. It's not about logic and emotion anymore. It's about power. Many of us don't have a whole lot of power. If you're a person who's holding the cards, you have the power and you can use them. So it's something to have, and we'll talk about where it plays effect very often, but it's not equally important for many of the negotiations that are there. The relative contribution depends, therefore, on the interests of the parties. Okay, what do you care about? What's the relationship between the parties? Okay, the landlord has more power than the tenant does. And the setting for the negotiation, you can actually change the power by changing the dimensions of the negotiation. For those of you who want to check the history on that, take a look at the Vietnam table. It took 3 years. And think about how many boys on both sides of that battle died while they tried to just decide what's the shape of the table. And that setting, the impact of what does that table mean, round versus square versus rectangle. I won't tell you what the final form was right now, but if you'd like to know, you can ask. That became a source of power in the negotiation. So the setting makes a big difference. Home court advantage in sports is an example of a negotiation for the energy of the audience, and that's why it's a big thing. Once you've set the strategy, the next issue is what's the exchange? What are you trading off in values? So it's looking at the value you have versus the value someone else has to be able to create something that's mutually acceptable. What you may be trading is money, how much you're willing to spend for it. So we've both agreed you want something, you want the apartment, but what are you willing to pay for it? It might be an issue of time. How much time is going to be invested in it? Because if initially a lot of time is invested in it, it's harder to walk away from it. But it might also be the amount of time you're willing to barter for what you're trying to do. It has to also do with what are the products or services, which are, for example, the subject of the negotiation. So it might be if you're trying to, for example, buy advertising time on a TV channel. For example, let's assume your channel in New York City would be, let's say, something like 5, 9, and 11 secondary channels, or it could be cable channels that are carrying TV shows like Friends or Seinfeld that are now syndicated. When you're selling them, the goal is to get the most money. When you're buying them, your goal is to be able to make the most profit from the value of the advertisements. So you might be willing to spend more if you can actually get higher amount of money in advertising. So the subject of the negotiation is the critical product or service that you might be trading off on. And creatively, you're bringing something new into the process. So, for example, if in the case that I've just given you, you're Channel 11 and you're trying to buy a syndicated show, and you want to be able to make sure that you're getting a large amount of money from the new advertising, but there's a limit to what the other side will do. You might decide that part of the deal is you want to have a first crack at the next show that becomes available. Again, it's something off the table that you're bringing on the table which suddenly increases the value. So you might have been the last person choosing in the first case, but by getting first dibs, first bid. Okay, think about a lottery for sports players. By getting a number one position there, you've added something new to the process, which makes the current thing valuable. It might be a volume situation where you're trying to buy more things than someone starts with. So, for example, if you're looking to buy a couple of chairs for a dining room table and you're saying, I need 4 chairs, there's a price. But if you suddenly realize you might be able to use those chairs for another purpose and you now offer, I'm willing to buy a dozen, that dozen may come in at a much cheaper price as than the individual chairs in the unit of 4 were, and that'll change it. And finally, the relationships that you have will determine what it is. You know, very often when someone says, I've been recommended to you, I've been referred to you, the vendor will give you a discount because of the nature of the referral and the relationship as a way of doing it, because they know that having been referred means that you're going to be more likely to buy, makes the process simpler, and therefore the person is going to do it. So these are different kinds of trading items that you have that you want to use. What's the result, therefore? Well, the result could be the initial objective. You want to buy a particular product or service. You want to rent maybe that apartment. You're looking for a job. But you might also get something beyond it. You might get a better deal. So I do a lot of coaching with young people who are looking for jobs. They come in for a job and they do a good interview. And one of the things that comes out of it is they say, you know what, on second thought, we think you're a little more qualified for this position than we thought. And so there's a lump in their throat. But then if the interviewer continues, but we think there's another position, pays more, better job, that might be more appropriate for you. Okay, that's an example of a better deal that you're getting. The result might be a concession or a compromise. If you're willing to pay $1,000 and the vendor who's selling you the product wants $1,200, you know what the result might be is based on information of what it's really valued for, who has a greater need for it, etc., that the person will either compromise or make a concession. We often hear people talk about splitting the difference. It's an example of just one concession or compromise. It doesn't make it the right one. Okay, and we'll talk about how you can control what is the flow of making these decisions and how to do them. And unfortunately, what sometimes happens is you can't reach a deal. You might get an impasse where there's an agreement to put it off, or a deadlock where there's an agreement that nobody can win one or the other because you're just not going to be able to budge on what you're doing. Those are the kinds of issues that can come up. So there are many different possibilities, and what you need to do is figure out in advance, what do I want, and plan for it. And that's why the lesson that I leave you with here is a failure to plan usually produces a plan that fails. So taking the time to figure out what you want and how you're going to negotiate for it makes a difference. So with that, let's spend some time on strategies. And the key here is it's the power of knowledge and the ability to persuade someone that's going to make a difference. So what I always like to do is start off with the concept of knowing yourself. What is it you really want? What are you willing to trade? Come in with a quiver full of different arrows that you can choose from. What are you willing to trade off that you didn't have? So it might be first pick in a draft. It might be the length of time. You might have decided when you were trying to rent an apartment, you really wanted it for 1 year, but you love it so much you're willing to stay 2 years, and so you're willing to trade a commitment for a second year in exchange for a better price and a smaller escalation. What's your BOTNA? For those of you who are familiar with the acronyms that are very often used by people in negotiation, BOTNA stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. What that really means is you need to be able to walk away at some point. You need to be able to say, at what point does this deal not make any sense? It's just not worth buying it. So your question is, I can negotiate an agreement, but if I can't, what's my best alternative to that? Maybe just I don't need it in the first place. So, for example, if you're in New York and you're looking to buy a car, you can buy a brand new car and you've got a lot of different choices. If we don't reach the right price, I can go to a different car supplier and buy from them. Or I might in New York decide, I don't need a car at all because I have terrific mass transit 24/7. It's operating. Or I may decide I want to use something like Zipcar, a car share service, that's changing the equation. Actually, watch how that's going to impact on the industry. The whole concept of sharing things like cars, etc., will have a long-term impact. So, what's your alternative? That's the question you have to ask by thinking it through. You have to answer what's your walk away point. At what point will you walk away and not even worry about where you're going? So it's a slightly different number, but it could be your BOTNA. And finally, what is the zone of probable agreement? As you negotiate, what is the other person probably looking to walk away with? Where are they going to accept it or not accept it? That's the zone. What you're willing to pay versus what they're willing to sell it for might be part of it, or vice versa. So the point is, it's a zone that you're going to work in, and you need to think about it so you know yourself in that domain. And finally, what you need to do is to know how you really feel about the issues, the parties, and the processes. The problem for most of us is we come in with a vested interest in where we are, but what we have to do is recognize that the real issue isn't what we're saying on the table. In other words, you put in a price and the other party says yes or no to that price. That's an initial position that you've taken. The real issue is, what are you willing to pay for it? And it may be a completely different price, or it may not be any different, but it might be. You need to know who all the parties are when you're negotiating. Are you negotiating with the right person? In sales and marketing, especially sales, we often talk about, are you speaking to the decision maker? Because if you're negotiating not with Vito, the very important top officer who makes a decision, but with his Seymour, who wants to see more details and is just there to collect information from you, what you're going to discover is he's constantly going to be asking for more information, be able to make better decisions, but isn't the decision maker. So you need to do that. You need to know what the process is. Are we all gathered around this table today to make the deal, and if we don't get a deal, we all walk away? Or can we go home at night and think about it and come back the next day? Know yourself. Know where you are. I, for one, very often will come up with what I think is a very fair proposition, but ask myself the next question. If I don't make the decision now and I want to make it tomorrow morning, will I overnight think it out and maybe see it from a different perspective? And that'll help everybody at the table, not just me. And the answer is, if it's yes, then I say, let's table it and make the decision tomorrow. The second part is to try to really understand the other party. Again, when we get to the table, what's happening is we're hearing a position. Okay, I'm not willing to spend more than $100 for this object. Okay, but that's a position. It doesn't mean the person really won't spend $101 or $102. The question you have to ask is, what are they really looking for? Do they really understand what the difference is? How much does he want? What's he willing to trade? What's his or her BOTNA in terms of walking away? So let me give you a classic example. One of our trusted advisors in our Vistage group, as you know, I do work with Vistage, which is 19,000 CEOs who run businesses between 5 million and 500 million. And we often discuss different issues about how we can sell and market more effectively. So one of the people was telling a story. He specializes in pricing. This is his expertise, and he helps find people who can work for large companies and specialize in pricing. And he tells a story about a company that was selling pumps, immersible pumps for water systems, and they were selling a unit for about $30,000. And a new competitor came into the industry with a slight change in the technology and was selling it for 25, and they were losing deals all the time. And so the sales force decided to mobilize itself and come down and sit down with the president of the company and saying, we need you to find a way to drop the price because we can't compete with this $25,000 product, especially when ours is 30. Okay. So that was their position, and they took a very hard position. If you don't do that, we're not going to be able to sell it, and we're going to start looking elsewhere. So the president, being very smart, said, let's take a look at the information behind it, not your position with the issue. The issue is you can't compete with our product at $30,000 against their product at $25,000. But what's the difference in the products, and are they both the same really or not? And investigating, it discovered two things. First of all, their unit lasted twice as long as the competitor's unit. Second of all, when it needed to be cleaned out and fixed in terms of because remember it's a pump and it gets dirty and it had to be dug out and um, revitalized each time, and it happened every 2 years with the competitor's product. Their product, because of the additional casing, didn't have to be touched for at least 5 years. When you go in each case, it actually cost as much as $50,000 because another pump had to come in temporarily to be able to provide the building with water, etc. So it was a very expensive effort. But if you don't have to do that every 5 years versus every 2 years, right then and there you save money. And so sitting down, all the salespeople for the first time, their eyes are opening up and realizing, oh my Lord, our product is actually vastly superior. So they repackaged it. And in doing the repackaging, they came to this conclusion that they could charge more, and they broke the price at $35,000. And good news is, within a year, they not only regained the market share they had, but they actually exceeded the market share. So not just responding to a position, but really understanding the issues is important. I'll give you a second example. There's a building where people were complaining day in and day out that that what was happening is the elevators were taking too long to come, and so they filed a complaint with the management company, and the management company took a look at it and tried to figure out what they were doing wrong with the elevators, why people felt it was taking so much longer to go. Were they breaking down more often? Was there actual speed difference? What was changing in it? And as they did the research, they couldn't really find anything that was wrong. So finally, the team sat down and said, well, the only solution we have is let's put in a different elevator system. Many of you are familiar. They now have elevator systems where you actually don't just go in and pick the floor you want. You actually tell them what floor you want, and an elevator comes and takes you directly to that floor. There are other elevator systems that only do tiers. Arguments of 1 to 20, and the other one goes, say, 21 to 40, etc. So the question which one to use, and they started investigating that, and obviously redoing the elevator system is very expensive. In the conversation, they spoke to somebody, and this person is a psychologist. And he looked at it and he said, there is maybe another option, and that is that people are just standing there and waiting, and it appears longer than it is because people's time has changed. We just don't have as much time as we used to have. And he proposed something completely different. He said, let's put in that lobby where the elevators are, let's put mirrors. Why? Because what people do is when they have mirrors is they look at themselves in the mirror and they take care of themselves. They fix their hair, they change their attire slightly, they move it around to look a little neater. They're taking care of themselves. Everyone laughed. That's not going to change anything. He said, you don't know, let's try it. Okay, brought in a different idea from not on the table and tried it. The whole thing cost them, $10,000 to put in new mirrors. The bottom line was, within a week of doing that, there was a flood of emails and letters going to the management team thanking them for the brand new elevator system they had because they were so much faster than before. Again, it's the perception, not the reality. It's the emotion, not the logic, that determines what people have. And therefore, negotiation, you need to be able to go off the table and try to figure out what's happening. The third part is shaping the game. Remember, in the beginning, you control the process. And the trick is you need to control it. So what issues are being discussed? In what order? And who's allowed at the table? So, for example, you might take the absolute most difficult thing to do first. You reach no consensus on it because it's the most difficult thing to do. And the net result is both parties are going to walk away. The alternative is you decide, let's find a way to build trust between each of us. And let's take really small issues up front, negotiate them, come to an agreement, learn about each other's style, develop some confidence that the other person is being honest and an honest broker on the information, and that'll make it easier for us in the future to be able to work together. If you take a look at the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it's an example. Initial conversation about peace years ago when it first started, these things, the Oslo agreements, etc., started with really small stuff, trade, travel, things like that, where both sides could benefit from it. And it developed some confidence, not a lot, but some. But obviously, as it got more complicated and the issues became much more significant, they could not reach an agreement. but all of the problems were at least some level of trust. Where problems were put off because some level of trust was first built. The second part of it is you control the setting. I like to call this 4D, four-dimensional. What most people think about is the space where they are, the location they're going to be, the props that they're going to use. But there's also the time dimension. That's the fourth D, because what happens is you can decide when to do it and how to do it. There's a great story by Gerald Cohn, who's a negotiation expert, about a negotiation he had to do in Japan. And he tells a story that he comes there for a 10-day negotiation. And when he arrives, the first thing they do is they welcome him. They said, listen, we're going to take care of you. Give us your passport and your tickets, and we'll make sure we get them back to you when you're finished. And you're going to go to this great hotel. And what we want to do is just, give you a real feeling for what Japan's all about. And when we start, and so he says, fine. And 9 days into this process, he spends a lot of time seeing the country, having conversations with the people, etc., but never negotiating. As it gets to the last day before he's ready to leave, they said, okay, we better sit down and do it. And he realized at this point they controlled the entire setting, because he could not go back in good faith to the United States and say, hi, I didn't reach an agreement because I wasted 9 days. So the pressure was on him more than them, and they controlled the setting. Remember, first impressions make a big difference. You never get a second chance to make a good first impression. And first offers make a difference. If you want to take charge of it, you make the first offer. If you don't have an idea of where that's going to help you, then let them make maybe the first offer, and then you can react to it. But keep in mind, what a first offer does is it anchors it. It makes it very, very possible. I do presentation training, and very often when people ask me what our price is and I'm working on a $100 million deal, I'll joke with them and say, you know what, I'm not going to take anything up front. You'll just pay me 1% of the contract when you finish it. And they go, you crazy? We're going to pay you $1 million? After that, obviously, whatever price I charge was realistically much, much smaller, and therefore much more palatable. It's anchoring. It's a process of doing things like that. Again, where the table is, where the seats are. Again, I highly recommend take a look at the negotiations of the Vietnam peace agreement in 1970s, early 70s. It took 3 years for them to finally agree where to put 4 seats around what kind of table. Negotiation is a process, in other words. It's not an event. It just happens one time. You really need to think it through and figure out how you want to handle it. The fourth strategy is to be creative. What lies beyond the predictable transaction? What's there that you haven't looked at that you could put on the table that would make a difference? So when you're talking about, as I use the example, this comes from a book called Negotiation Genius, about the price of TV syndicated shows, the recognition that if you get first draft on next year's program, paying a little more this year to get advantage of a better one next year might make a lot of sense. Whose other issues can affect the other party? What can they do? What can they add that's going to make a difference? Because there are other issues that both parties have. So, for example, if I'm looking to lease an apartment and I'm trying or rent an apartment, what I might want to do is have access to certain space for storage. The access to using, let's say, a garden or a rooftop or something like that the other party could add into the equation that would make a difference and make the price a secondary issue. What would a contingency contract do? If I'm not sure I want to buy it, what about buying an option to be able to do it right now and then move forward, build some actual opportunity to work together before we finalize the contract? In other words, the goal is to think out, how do I create an optimal solution step by step rather than trying to do everything at once, if that's the best way to find out what it is. And then what you want to do is use some of the persuasion strategies. I've mentioned Robert Cialdini. He goes through a whole lot of these, and I'm just going to mention them briefly here, given that it's webinar only. But, for example, the first one's reciprocity. What we've learned is if you really want to get what you want, the very best way to get what you want is to be first the giver. If you give something, you get. People like to do it. Hare Krishna mastered that as a technology. when they were trying to raise money in the, again, 60s, 70s, 80s. They tried to raise money, they didn't get any, and then somebody said, what if you give something out first? Will that make a difference? And sure enough, by giving people a flower, that made them more willing to say, sure, okay, I'll be definitely willing to donate. And so as they walk down the street, they were giving out flowers and bringing them 3, 4, 5 times the amount of money that they got before. So give before you receive makes a big difference. Social proof, what outside of what you're doing suggests that what you're doing makes sense. So social proof could be, for example, if you're selling a piece of real estate and you focus on what the ROI is for the investment and show how every building on that block has an ROI of, let's assume, 22%, then making it easy for you to understand, I'm now about to do the next one. We've already done all of these. They add credibility. Social proof is outside credibility. We kind of see a loose case of that if you're walking down the street and you're watching people, and as you see them, and they're all staring up at the top of a building, you look up too, because they've given you an indication. If they're looking up, something must be happening. Again, it's kind of social proof. Third-party credibility is a testimonial. It's somebody giving you a testimonial for your service. So if you provide a service or a product and people might have questions about it, you provide third-party endorsements of the value of the product, it makes it easier for someone to buy it. Consistency. We tend to buy from people who are consistent across it because they know that's there. So if I know one vendor's been providing services on a reliable basis all the time, I'm more comfortable. You see that all when you think of Amazon.com and you want to buy from one of their used book providers. They have their rating, 46,000 people giving them a 99% rating. That's the consistency, the conformity, the comfort that you create. On the other hand, sometimes the best way to get someone's attention is by contrast, do something totally different. Stand out in the crowd in a way that makes sense for you, but that no one else is going to compete with. So, for example, when I ran one of my first companies, a company called Brilliant Image, we were in computer graphics, and everybody in that business was going to audiovisual shows, and that was, again, the consistency. We asked, where is our growth market going to be? And it's people who are learning how to use graphics on computers, using Freelance and using Harvard Graphics and using even Excel spreadsheets or Borland. And we realized this was our growing market. So we went to PC Expo. And in fact, in the first year, we were in 15 different booths of all of these major companies who were impressed by the fact that we could take their files and turn them into slides for presentations and save them time and money. That contrast is what made us stand out in the crowd. There's scarcity. We all see that. How many are left? Again, go to Amazon.com, and when you're ready to buy, they'll say only 3 books left, only 2 books left. That concept that is a limited supply only, buy today. Think of it how powerful the most valuable day in shopping and retail is, the day after Thanksgiving, okay? Black Friday. Okay, it's a limited supply usually that's there. If you want these special deals, come in at 4 in the morning and we offer the deal. Scarcity. Reverse risk is making people feel comfortable with what they're buying by recognizing there really isn't risk. So, for example, it might be buy this product, use it for 20 days, and if you don't like it, send it back, and there's no cost. There's a company, it's called Zappos, that built its entire proposition on the fact that you can buy 27 pairs of shoes, try them all on, or never try any of them on other than one. Keep that one, send them all back if you want to, and they pay for it. They've reversed the risk. They made it tolerable for you to say no without having a problem. And finally, the concept that loss aversion beats gain attainment. In other words, what we would rather do is avoid losing something than by striking out for a gain. That actually became the basis of a economics Nobel Prize. In 1996, Kahneman Tversky got it, proving that people would rather avoid losing what they have than going after something to gain, and that's how people make decisions. So again, all of these are strategies you can use to make a difference. Within them, you can also use tactics that increase influence. And you've seen many of these, for example, the good cop, bad cop idea, or if you've ever been in a case where you're buying cars, this and that industry is synonymous with, you want to buy it for, The guy wants to sell the car. Sticker price is 22,500. You're only willing to spend 20. He tells you it's 22.5. You tell him you're not willing to spend any more 20. He says, I don't know if I can get it to you for that price. You know what? I'm going to go to my higher authority. I'm going to go in the back and talk to my boss and see what he can do. And maybe I can come back. And then he comes back and says, I'll tell you what, he liked you. So last car for the day, I'm going to give it to you for $21,000. How's that? And again, there was nobody in the room. It's the concept of a higher authority. A foot in the door, it's again what I call the nibble effect in a sense. What you're doing is you're giving somebody something, and then that opens the door for reciprocity for them to work for you. And the nibble is giving them little by little by little, not just 1 foot. The door in the face is the reverse. Asking for something that's outrageous. Person says, are you crazy? There's no way. And then coming in with a realistic buy. Straw man arguments. We see that all the time in negotiations where people are bringing up issues that have nothing to do with what's really important. Everyone's working on that, loving it, and then you bring in the real issue that you want to deal with. These are tactics that you can use. A trial close, getting someone to agree. Well, if I could deliver this product to you on Tuesday, would you then take it on a Tuesday afternoon? Before 5 or after 5? And so you're focusing on that close and you're getting to kind of agree where they're going. You might lowball a product, which is a tactic of just giving a price below that you're only due. And we see that today in the airline industry all the time, because once upon a time, the price that you saw was the price you paid. Today, there are all kinds of add-ons, where you see the same thing with cell phones, all kind of add-on costs that are there, etc. Setting a deadline, if you don't do it by this and this time, buy it now, you won't get it. Limited time offer. Flinching is a great concept. It's just listening to someone and making a bodily reaction. You got to be crazy without saying anything. And as a person reads your language that you're saying this is an impossible thing to do, they go, well, you know what? I can drop my prices. We'll see. That has to do with the fact that you should never compete against yourself. So a good negotiator, which all of you are going to be at the end of this hour, are going to understand you can't do that. 7th are things you need to know with the strategies and the tactics to make you more effective. And these are 8 critical things you really want to play with. First one's information. It's kind of a checklist I'm going to suggest. What do you know about each other? What do you know about yourself, as I said to you in the strategy, and what do you know about the other person? Do you have the information you need? Today, it's so much easier to negotiate because you can look anything up. What's the real price of something? How good a vendor is this? Has this person been getting positive or negative statements on the computer? It's all there. Just Google it, and you'll find out. Expertise. Is there accuracy in the facts and the documentation? This is the most important part. If you want to negotiate and get some credibility with the other side, be an expert. Really know your facts and everything. I sat in on a presentation from one of my students this morning, and the person is presenting information, contrasting Alibaba versus eBay versus Amazon using mid-2014 data. And when asked the question, when did they go public, person goes, I'm really not sure. And then the class is going, oh, it was at the end of last year. So all the information was obsolete because all the information in 2014 at the end was public information, publicly available, but not used. Students clearly lack the expertise of giving us proper facts. Credibility. You mean what you say. It's a very important part. That's what you're looking for when you want to work it. If you can be credible with everything you're saying, the other party will respect you and trust you. And trust is the critical part. Is your integrity really there? When you say you're going to do something, do you have a history of keeping your word or not keeping your word? That's a critical component. Again, it's that emotional part that's going to make a difference of what you're doing. As I said to you, you want to control the setting. That's location, time, and place. You need to understand what the personality is. Okay, you want to empathize, not criticize with the other person so that you can work together well. Does the person really have, as I mentioned, authority? make decisions. So many salespeople will spend time with people who do not have the real power and authority to do it. So the perceived power may not be really authority, and you need to know that, because if you come to a deal, you've negotiated your best deal with a person who's not making the decision, then what happens is that person goes back to the decision maker and says, okay, we got him here, now you can take him the extra 10%. And finally, you want to reward the person that you're working with, because there could be future decisions that are going to be made, future negotiations. You want to show that you're holding the person accountable for what they've said, and that if they keep to their word, you can work together going forward. So what I want you to do is remember these key rules when you're negotiating. We've said this before. You need strategies, you need tactics, you want to have those key principles, but here's some things to keep in mind. One, never negotiate against yourself. If somebody flinches, your response should be, "What's the matter?" Why? Because the answer is, if you react immediately, you may find out that what you're reacting is actually in the wrong direction. So what happened to us, someone comes in and I'm asking for an apartment, and they're looking at it, and I tell them the apartment's $1,000, and they flinch, and they're thinking, my God, what a terrific buy at 1,000. I thought this would be at least 1,400. And I'm thinking, oh my God, they think 1,000 is too much, so I dropped the price by 900. You're only hurting yourself. You always want to leave yourself some room to maneuver. That's why making a first option, first offer, and then using it as an anchor makes sense in many negotiations. But when you're not sure how to anchor it, then listening and responding may be a better solution. You want to try to avoid single issues and create instead variables about the larger issue. So it's not just price, going back to buying the syndication of TV shows for cable. It's not just what's the price of one, but it's the ability for us to work together year after year after year, looking at other TV shows that you could offer me in the future might make a difference, okay? And an example is this company was trying to sell a building, had the price down, and was offering it, and a number of people were looking at it and thinking it's a little bit high, I'm not sure what to do. This particular negotiator comes in and takes a look at it, and he says that he hears the number, and right away he says, fine, I'll do it, and he does the deal. And then everyone says, well, why did you do it? He said, because he gave me the residential price. I checked the zoning. This thing very easily could be commercial, be worth almost twice as much. Again, had the information, looked it up, worked it. So looking up, not always looking at things the way they are, and seeing what other variables are there. How else could this building be used? Could it be multiple use? Would make a difference. Usually the person with the first offer loses unless you've used it for a positive anchor. So if you're not sure, then let the other person make the offer, and then you make a decision where to go. When I was in China last year, one of the people I was with was telling me about being on a street and meeting a vet, and the person was asking for a vase and asked for 500 yen for the vase, and she just looked and walked away. And he said, what's the matter? And he goes, too much, too much, too much. Next thing is he comes in at 50. She bought it eventually for 12 and a half yen. I mean, just an incredible concept. Again, always try to listen. She didn't just grab the first offer. You want to always try to match needs and the objectives. What are your real needs? Again, goes back to knowing yourself and the objectives of the negotiation. If you're looking to rent an apartment and you've got a month to look at it, your objective is to find a good deal, but not to make one until you know it. Then you can match what needs you're really looking for in terms of what you're looking for. Keep in mind, just as I said, time is an issue, so is silence. Sometimes there's nothing to say because you're not sure what it means and where to take it. In that case, silence is a form of communications. Use pauses well. And if there is a pause, here's the rule. The person who speaks first usually loses. It goes back to that offer. So let the other person make the next statement. Never give without receiving. If you're going to negotiate, if you're going to make an exchange and you're going to offer somebody something, then make sure that you're getting something in return. And otherwise, what you're doing is just cheapening your value and losing credibility in the eyes of the other party. So what you want to always do is exchange. That's why the second part is selling and buying. First part, second part is exchange. There has to be something that comes back. Don't just give away. Don't just compromise. Finally, it's okay sometimes to remember that someone's using a really weird tactic and you know it, and calling it that, because that stops them dead in the tracks in doing that. So you're dealing with someone, let's assume someone's showing you an apartment and you're looking to buy it for $1,200, and the person says, no, 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 it's 1,500. I don't think I can do anything extra. And the person would say, well, you know what? I'm going to go to my property manager and see what I can do. Can you stand here and wait here? And you go, oh, you're going to the higher authority gambit. Calling it that makes the person stop and realize, you're sophisticated, you know what you're doing, playing games. I want to go back to something I said in the very beginning. We're not always rational. We like to think we are, but sometimes we make decisions based on emotion. There are blind spots. There are things we don't see. We can't see it. We don't know. And when, it's very important to be able to understand what it is we don't know. And so having someone with you very often in negotiation helps you do that. There are attribution biases. I'm a psychologist who specialized in attribution theory, which basically says we attribute causes to people, but actors and observers see things differently. Actors tend to look at the environment for why things happen. Observers actually attribute personality traits that may have nothing to do with what the person is. So having another person who's looking at it is, again, a good idea. There are cultural issues. In certain cultures, saving face is very important, and that's true at different levels of every culture, I think. And so what you want to do is keep those things in mind. You have to remember not everyone is always telling you the truth. There are people who lie, they deceive, and you need to recognize that could happen at any time. Recently worked with someone, and halfway through it, I said, something, this sounds like a scam to me. And the person looked at me and goes, no, no, no. I said, think about it. We went through the fact pattern and said, oh my God, you know something? I have a feeling you could be right. We did further investigation, and sure enough, on Google, we found some negative information indicating this person was a scamster. People get angry. People sometimes control their anger. Sometimes they play with anger, okay? They get really angry and furious knowing you'll react. You need to know that. Some people, when they lose it, they'll threaten you. Okay, again, is that real or is it not real? This is the level of what you're doing, which is why in some cases, as I said, having a partner makes for more sense. So now that you understand what negotiation is, what the strategies are, tactics are, some of the key principles and lessons about how to use it, how do you actually win, meaning get what you want? And the answer is you got to focus on practice. Practice really does make perfect. When Jeff Calvin put his book together, Talent is Overrated, what he did is he took a look at a number of people and he asked the question, why are they so good at what they do? And he comes up with the equation, many of you are familiar, that these people spend 10,000 hours focusing on what they do. And as a result of that, they became as successful as they are. And that's the point. They constantly engage in what we call deliberate practice. So if you're in a business, sales, buying, and you're going to negotiate, what's absolutely critical for you to do is figure out in every way you can, how do I practice? Rehearse it and try different things. And if you have a team of people you can do it with, you should. And then the second part is to understand that you've really got to get out there and do it. So, for example, with my students, what I do is I have them go to what's called a shuk or a bazaar or an exchange where they can buy things and say, I want you to go buy something that you have no interest in buying, but get to the point where you can just buy it if you wanted to. And just negotiate hard and get used to walking away. Why is that important? Because until you actually do it, it's all theory. A great book was put together, by David Sandler called You Can't Learn to Ride a Bike in a Seminar. And it's a great title because it makes the point. When you learn to ride a bike, you're going to fall and you're going to get up and you're going to learn, oh my God, I live when I get up. It's a completely different experience. And then you learn that riding isn't just about pedaling and using brakes. It's about finding a sense of balance. So there's all different processes, psychologically, neurologically, that are going to make a difference in how you ride a bike. But through experience, you can't do it in a seminar. You need to actually get out there. So my advice to you is to practice wherever possible. And with an important deal, get a coach to master it. And as you work in the process, work with someone else to do it. So let's put it all together now, because as I said, my goal is to help you become a master of negotiation. Number one is you want to be prepared. You have to plan to win. You have to build a plan. You have to know who you are, You have to know what the other person is. You have to know what you want. What you want to do is control the setting so that you have all the props, time, dimensions in your favor, and control the agenda. What's the order we're going to go through? You want to know when you start selling your proposition to the other person or buying it, if that's how you're doing it, that you're using a combination of logic, emotion, and if possible, power. If you've got it, you can use it. You don't have to use it right away. You might save it as in the background, but it's yours for you to use. You want to ask yourself, what is not on this table that I can bring to this table that adds new values that I can use for exchange? And then you need to create an atmosphere that focuses on the collaborative deal, not focusing on competition. It's not that I win, you lose, but it's more how do you get something out of here to win. There's a philosophy of a friend of mine from another culture once put together, and he said, in my country, it is about winning and losing, but our philosophy is I have to win more than you. No matter what it is, I have to win more than you. So it's not just winning and losing, but it's the degrees. You need to understand your culture and where you're coming from and how it works. And finally, when you reach a resolution, what you really want to do is celebrate it, because if you don't, there's a concept called buyer's remorse, where people feel sorry for having done it. They feel they've been taken advantage of possibly. And to avoid that, you need to, together, both of you need to feel we've reached a positive resolution for both of us and we've saved it. If you do this, you really will be a master at negotiations and have great success. And with that, I want to thank you for coming to today's webinar. If there are any questions, I will take them now. We're pretty much at the end of our hour, but we have a few extra minutes, and if there are questions, I'd be glad to do this. For those of you who have questions as you proceed, as I said, you can email me at any time or call. I do this for those of you who belong to associations. We do these programs as keynotes and as seminars because a lot of people need a lot of help on becoming better negotiators. There's a question here, what do I think about courses? If you're in school, my advice is most business schools right now, especially at the MBA level, are offering negotiation courses, and many of the executive programs are offering them. You should definitely consider taking them. They give you a lot of time to practice within rather than a one-day seminar. When I do my keynotes and my seminars, I actually leave people with homework and tell them to feed me back the results, and that's a way we get to keep the conversation going. It's a long-term process. And with that, again, I want to thank you for coming. I want to remind everybody that there will be 2 more webinars that are coming along. You should feel free to come to them. Next week's webinar is on rainmaking. Sorry about that. It's on rainmaking, and the one after that is on next